So you may remember in CodePen, you don't have to put the head and the body and all that stuff. You can just start writing the body inside the HTML section. So I'm just going to put a single element here. I'm going to make it an element of type main, which is an HTML5 element. And then let's turn to our JavaScript. Let's make a component, which will be a class. We'll call it app. And it will extend React.component. Okay. Now, one thing we will for sure have to do at the end of all this is render that component. We'll say React DOM.render, and we need to put in some JSX representing our component. That's app here. Notice the self-closing tag. JSX is more like XML than HTML. So empty elements must have a closing tag, so you use self-closing tags by putting a slash right before the closing angle bracket. Now, what part of the document do we want to replace with this component? Document, query selector, main. Main is the name of the element, so that's all there is to that selector. Very nice. Now we know our component is going to need a render function. That's where the magic happens. And all that needs to do is return some JSX. So let's just return an H1 and H2. That says League of Acrobats. Yay, how come it's not showing up? We're trying to use React, but we didn't actually include React, did we? So to do that inside CodePen, let's look at the settings here. Let's go to the JavaScript tab. And I need to add some external JavaScript. Let's quick add React. What do you know? It's there. And I saw React DOM. We need both of those. React DOM is what we called render on at the very end there. Cool. JavaScript preprocessor. Well, JSX isn't real JavaScript. It's an extension to JavaScript. It's not part of the ECMAScript standard, and it's not on track to become one. It's not even a proposal for the standard. So we do need a preprocessor that understands JSX and can turn it into regular JavaScript. For that, we use Babel. Babel is very common, not just in the React world, where it's nearly universal because virtually everyone uses JSX, but it's also used to translate up-to-date JavaScript to previous versions. For example, ES6 and newer down to ES5, or even brand new stuff down to ES6. But for our purposes, the most important thing is that it understands JSX. So having done that, we will see nothing still happening. Why is nothing still happening? Babel, React, React DOM. Sure is. Yep, case matters, folks. There it is, League of Acrobats. Thank you. Let's do one more thing while we're up in the settings. On the CSS tab, you notice you can add some other stuff. You can paste something in, or you can quick add something like foundation. Let's just quick add foundation. Hey, now it looks slightly different. Now this doesn't do a whole heck of a lot. Let's make it do a thing. Let's make it do the kind of thing that we've been doing this whole time. Type something into a box, add it to a list. Piece of cake. Now we're going to need more than one line of JSX here. So that means we're going to have to put parentheses. Let's put a row. Div class equals row. Not in JSX. Class is a reserved word in JavaScript. So that becomes camel-cased class name row. Inside there, we'll do one of our fancy 8-column divs centered, which means it needs to be offset by 2. We're old pros at this. Class name. Medium offset 2. Medium 8 columns. Inside there, let's put an H2, League of Acrobats. And let's put a form. And in this form, let's put an input. Remember your self-closing tag. It is of type text. We can put a placeholder in there if we want. Acrobat name. And let's put a button. Button type, submit. Class name, use our foundation classes. Expanded success button, ought to do it. Sign me up. Very good. I think we're done with our HTML. We'll just get it out of the way. Beautiful, beautiful form. Now we need some place to put the things after we enter them. So let's make another div, also with a class of row, class name of row. Let's put one of our fancy 8-column things in there. And a UL. And we'll go ahead and give it a class name of no bullet, like we did before. Looks like I have an error. Unexpected identifier. What's the problem, folks? JSX must contain one element. It can have as many children as you want. You cannot have siblings in there. We have 2 rows here. There is no one element containing all of it. So if we want to return both of these in the same component, and pro tip, you would probably make these 2 separate components, but we're trying to keep it real simple here. So let's just put a div around both of them. I'll highlight all this. Just hit tab to indent. And close this outer div. That's better. It's not complaining anymore. There's nothing in that UL to see, but it's there, I believe. Now what? How do we make it actually do something when it submits? We don't use fancy things like add event listener because we're not dealing with the real DOM. We do it the JSX way. And that way, as gross as this would be in regular HTML, we will just put on submit here. Notice that is camel-cased. The onSubmit attribute in HTML is all lowercase, but that's just because the DOM is wildly inconsistent when it comes to this kind of thing. JSX is not. It's fixing some of that stuff. So if it's more than one word, it's going to camel-case it. So onSubmit, camel-cased. And we set that equal to some function. So we need to put a function inside our component to handle this. So inside the component, before the render function, let's have another method called addAcrobat. And let's just make it do anything. Let's make it receive an event and console log that event. On submit equals this dot add acrobat. Notice the curly braces. If a prop has a string value, a string literal as a value, you can just quote it. Otherwise, you need curly braces. Let's see what this does. I'm going to open up my console, my real console. The console in here won't handle objects and stuff, so let's do this. It's a little big. There we go. Let's try that Alex over there. R. It doesn't say event. Looks like it has a property called native event that has an event. Interesting. This isn't a regular old DOM event. This is a React synthetic event. So it wraps something around the event. It's important to note we are not dealing with the real DOM here. We're dealing with an abstraction. So while you can get to a real event down in here, what we're dealing with is this synthetic event, which is something that is specific to React. Now, it has a lot of the same properties. We still have current target and stuff like that, so we can still use that if we need to. So that probably means we can prevent default if we want. All right, now what? What are we going to do with these acrobats? With these names? Well, let's add them to an array, like we did in MegaRoster. We're maintaining the state of our component. And this time there's a mechanism built into React for state. So this was practice, doing it the hard way all by ourselves. So we learned that you need to first define state in your constructor. So let's add a constructor here. Now there's already stuff happening in the React component constructor, so we need to make sure that still happens. So we call super. You probably have done this in another language if you used inheritance before. So this calls the constructor from the parent class. So we need to do that first. Then we can initialize our local state in this component, which we do by simply setting this.state. And it should be an object, and we'll give it a property of acrobats. We'll just set that to an empty array. You can go ahead and put your comma if you want in case you're going to add more properties later. Doesn't matter. Okay, so what good does that do us? We need to refer to our input somehow inside add acrobat. One way we can do it, and there are several, is to add a ref to that input, a reference. So here's our input. And we'll add a prop called ref. No quotes, curly braces. And it should receive a function that will receive the input itself as an argument. We'll put a fat arrow function in here. And what we're going to do is set this dot acrobat name equal to this input. So now, from any of our functions in the component, we can get to the acrobat name through this dot acrobat name. Some syntax you just have to kind of memorize, get used to, if you want to do it this way. So inside add acrobat, we can get to that through this dot acrobat name dot value, we hope. Let's try it. Console log this dot acrobat name dot value. What happens if we try to type Eric in there? Too large for the console. Fine. Let's try that again. Pari. Oh, explode. Cannot read property acrobat name of undefined. So what is it saying is undefined? This? This itself is undefined? Line 14. This, the acrobat name of undefined. This is one of the most common errors you'll see in JavaScript. Cannot read property something of undefined. Usually means that something that you thought was something is actually nothing. In this case, this. This isn't even the event that the object that the event fired upon. It's undefined. Why do you hate us, React? React is just a hateful, hateful old cuss. So we're going to have to do something about this. There are several ways we could deal with it. One, when we set up the event handler down here, we could just bind it to this at that time. Let's try that. Other Alex. I should probably clear my console first. All right, now it says other Alex. Okay, that's one way to do it. Another way we could do it is to put a fat arrow function in here. Because we know inside the arrow function, this will be bound correctly because that's what arrow functions do. And then we could just manually call add acrobat and pass event. And when you access a method like this using the dot syntax, this is bound the way we want it. So try that. We'll say Jacques here. Hey, that works too. Another way that you see a lot, and you really do see this a lot, even though it's my least favorite way of doing this, but it must be somebody's favorite. We'll change this back. Up in the constructor, we could just, for all of our methods, say this dot add acrobat equals this dot add acrobat. Sam, it's up to you which one. Uh-oh. Can't read property acrobat name of undefined. Yeah, I kind of need to bind this here. This dot add acrobat equals this dot add acrobat bind this. Just say that in your constructor. Then wherever you call it, it'll be bound correctly. One of the other Sams. No, not that one. Okay. Seems to work. So take your pick. They all work. Perhaps the simplest is to just do it down here, since we're not going to do it anywhere else. But it's up to you. We'll learn yet another way later, because we're going to get real sick of writing bind this otherwise. Okay, so now we can get the value. Now what do we do with it? Probably this dot state dot acrobats dot push, right? No, we're not going to do that. We're not going to try to modify this thing correctly. We're going to use set state, because doing it this way does not cause the component to re-render, and that does us no good. So instead, I'm going to make a local array inside here called acrobats, and it's going to be a copy of the array that is in state. One way to do that is to use something that was new in ES6 called a spread, which is represented by an ellipsis, 3 dots. This dot state dot acrobats. So in this case, what that does is it gives me back all of the items in this array. And by wrapping it with square brackets, that means I get a new array that contains all of those things. We're going to be using that a lot to copy things. Simple way to copy an array, simple way to copy an object. So now Acrobats contains a copy of that, and I can take this Acrobat name value, push that onto my Acrobats array, or unshift if you like. Then let's set state. This dot set state, we give it an object, Acrobats. Now it's worth noting that if there were other keys already in state, I'm not removing them by doing this. It's just going to replace these properties with the ones that I specify here. Now we've learned a shorthand for this. I don't know if you remember, but if the value in the key, if the value is in a variable with the same name as the key, you can shorten this to just Acrobats. And it's the same way, same thing as writing Acrobats : Acrobats. You dig? And when we put object and properties and so on, we tend to put a space inside the curly braces. When it's a prop value, something very bad is happening on my Mac.